Good morning and welcome to the Orlando Real Estate Buzz. I'm Brendan Rendo, and we've got a lot to go over today. It has been a very busy week. We have housing, a number of things in housing happening. One of the big ones, new housing sales continue to drop. We had Jerome Powell yesterday in front of Congress, um, basically saying it's not my fault. We've got Fed, gov- Fed, Fed governors debating whether or not there should be a rate decrease in July. So we've got a lot to go over today, and we're looking forward to it. So thank you, and welcome to the Orlando Real Estate Buzz. Hello and welcome again. My name is Brendan Rendo, and I'm with the Homes in Orlando team. Just wanted to hit some of the major topics today in the news. A lot of stuff going on. One of the big ones is yesterday, Jerome Powell testified in front of Congress, and he really kind of took a huge beating on questions about the housing market. And basically, he came out saying, "Not my fault," which I can kind of understand because his mandate is actually given to him from Congress. It's not he makes it up, anything like that, but Congress has given him the mandate. And of course, that mandate is to get inflation at 2% and to keep employment as high as it possibly can. Those are the mandates. The mandates is not to spur the housing market. And a lot of the Congress people just kept coming out, asking him questions of, what can we do? What can you do? What can you do? Um, and he just kept coming back to our job is to keep inflation at 2% and to make sure that the employment rate is as high as it can be. There were a couple good questions. One of the best ones I thought was from one of the Congress people that was asking about the mortgage backed securities. And she basically asked, since the spinoff of the Fed of their mortgage backed securities, has that affected the interest rates, the mortgage interest rates, where they're at, and the spread in those. And he basically said no, he doesn't feel it. He feels that the amount that they're spinning off hasn't been high enough to actually affect the yield on the mortgage-backed securities, and hasn't had any real effect on keeping those higher. Which I tend to agree that they're not selling off a lot of them. It's the sell-off of the Fed assets has been fairly slow overall. So he just kind of got drilled, got beat up. I kind of agree, and I think a lot of the Congress has to realize that, hey, that's his mandate is not housing, even though everyone's very frustrated with the housing market right now. It is probably the biggest um, part of the economy overall and our GDP. And it's really taken a beating. And where you see that is in new home sales. I mean, we saw April, we saw um, other months really kind of take a hit. But overall, I mean, you look at May's sales, we were down 13.7% in new home sales. And that's again, even with all these incentives that the builders are providing you with, the lower 30-year fixed rates, it's sitting at 5%, the $25,000 towards closing costs, so that a lot of people can actually get into, some of these new homes if you structure it right with all the incentives for almost nothing down. Problem is when you're still got a 5% mortgage and the average cost of a new home is, 500,000, $600,000, still makes that payment a little tough to swallow overall. And one place we're seeing it the most is here in the South. Florida, we have just seen a total stagnation on new home sales. I've I got my emails this week. One of the big ones was from Taylor Morrison. They had 5 houses that they sent out to the realtors that on average, they were looking at a $40,000 price cut on these homes. That's a huge price cut. And the average price was starting around $500,000. So they're trying to do everything to push these home sales out. And then when we look at the inventory overall, this is a great graph showing you that the new home inventory is almost back to the level we were at in 2006, which was a boom time as well. So that inventory is just growing, continues to grow. And what's that causing? Well, that's causing these permits of the starts to really start to decrease. So we're seeing the lowest level of starts that we've seen in nearly 5 years. And this, of course, is a cyclical swing that we go through quite often in the housing market. And it's rather frustrating because we now know, you know, what's going to happen in 2 years from now. Say the rates do pull back a little bit, even to 6 or maybe even to 5.5%, is all of a sudden all these people who've been sitting on the sidelines, they're going to want to come in and start buying. What is that going to do? That's going to force the prices back up. And what's going to be our problem again? Our problem is going to be inventory again. So our inventory, where it's at an extremely high level right now, is going to turn around and implode. And it's a continuous cycle that you kind of look at the Fed and you want the Fed to keep things more consistent. But right now, I kind of agree that their policy is forcing the roller coaster. Is a quarter point cut going to make that much of a difference? I don't think so, but I think a lot of it is the mentality of people is, oh, here's some relief. Because again, the rates are not so much tied to the overnight rate of the Fed, but it's more tied to that 10-year treasury. And we've gotten some nice relief over the past 5 days in the 10-year treasury. And you've seen rates pull back a little bit from, roughly sitting around 7% last week to we're probably down around 6.75 today. And it's kind of nice. Here's your peak from about a week ago. And you see that we've taken a slow, steady decline in that. We're taking a little bump back up today. And I think part of that has to do with the PCE inflation number came out today. And that number did not help anything. It was not what we're looking for. And really, I think kind of pushes back Powell's point that, hey, inflation's still not under control. Because what happened? Our PCE came in today at 2.7% versus an estimate of 2.6. It's not off far, but it's still at the high end of the sticky side of what they're looking for. And he's gung-ho that he is not going to cut rates till he sees some relief in that inflation number, and he can push it down. He still feels that the tariffs are going to cause inflation, even though the past couple months with the tariffs in place, we really haven't seen that large increase in inflation that Powell had warned us about. Maybe we're at kind of a sticky point, but we're not seeing that large increase that we have seen that Powell felt that we were going to get from the tariffs. Now, interestingly enough, earlier this morning also came out that China and the U.S. have reached an agreement on the trade deal, so that could possibly give some tariff relief as well. So, like I said, there's a lot going on today overall. But interestingly enough, yesterday, with Powell testifying in front of Congress and saying it's a wait and see situation. We're going to wait and see until we get the actual data that we're looking for to show the decrease in inflation. We are not going to cut rates. Governor Bowman came out and contradicted him. She came out and said, hey, I'm in favor of cutting interest rates in July. Is that as long as inflation stays low, which does that mean 2.5% for her? Does it mean the 2.7, 2.6 that we've seen the past couple of months in the PCE, the core inflation numbers? Or is she talking that 2%, which is their mandate? Be interesting to see when the July comes out, because really had a unanimous no vote not to decrease rates this past meeting. Are we going to see more um, this disagreement in this coming meeting in July? I I don't know. I don't know. I think Powell has still got enough weight behind him that we're not going to see that price or that rate cut in July. So it's really kind of sticky. Then of course, I believe August they don't have a meeting or about government's vacation time. So this could be the last chance. This is the last chance we may have to see a rate cut before September. So still a sticky situation overall in the market, and just not sure which way this is all going to go. So it's one of those things you kind of got to watch. Um, watch the employment numbers come out over the next couple of weeks. How does that affect everything? Um, we're not going to get a new inflation report before their next meeting. So, but it's kind of good to see a little disagreement with people, and that's I thought it was extremely interesting that Bowman actually came out yesterday after Powell was testifying and said, yes, I believe we should have a rate cut, because Trump is really pressuring for the rate cuts. And his whole point of the rate cuts is, hey, we need to have the rate cuts so that we can get because we still have all um, these treasury bills that need to be refinanced. And, we can't go from 2% to 4.5%, or we'll get absolutely crushed deficit wise, because then we may be looking at, which is currently the past year was $1 trillion in deficit spending. It may jump to make $1.5 trillion. It really could. So understand everybody's pressure, understand why everything's going on, and in the meantime, what is it doing to the housing market? It's just stagnating the housing market. We're seeing a little more activity out there, but the buyers are being extremely cautious. And if it doesn't fit, they don't have a problem walking away from a deal. We're seeing that the average, 1 out of 4 contracts right now is falling out. So if there's something that a buyer's not completely happy with, then they're just saying, nope, not going to go through with it, which I understand, because this is a huge investment. And at these rates, it's, it's, you've got to make sure that you're extremely happy with where you're going to be buying, because most people, it used to be 7 to 8 years that most people held on to their homes. It's actually jumped to around 13 years now that people are holding on to their homes. A lot of that simply economics, nothing more, nothing less, is the economics of the whole situation. So a lot of moving parts. I think we're going to continue to see housing stay stagnant, um, you know, lower sales going at least into the end of this year. I don't see anything that will cause a huge boom or anything that's going to force the the treasury yields, the 10-year down, which of course mortgage rates generally follow on that. The only thing I could see is that if someone can put some pressure on the um, the spread between what the 10-year T and what current mortgage rates they're sitting at. That's really, I think, the only opportunity we have to see something push and open up housing. Because if we can just cut that spread, which is historically large right now, even half a point, that's enough. That brings us back down to 6.25, possibly even 6%. And I think that's where we see the housing market open up again. And we see some growth in it. We see some growth in sales. But without that, I just see a very stagnant market. And as a seller, you've got to be on your game for the sale of your house. It's got to be clean. It's got to be ready. It's got to be move-in ready. So you've got to look at it and say, okay, am I going to have to put in, a couple $1,000s? Am I going to have to do the fresh paint? That thing that the item that I'm waiting to fix, my hot water heater that's, 18 years old, you know, I'm going to have to get that fixed, because not only is the buyer going to see that, but the home inspector is going to see that, the insurance company is going to see that, and it's going to stop or delay the sale of my home. So this goal, as a seller, what I'm doing is I'm going to spend more time preparing my home for sale than I have in the past 2 or 3 years, because the ones that are selling are, number one, are priced right. You see, Redfin came out this week with a study report that shows that the gap between what a seller believes his house is worth and what a buyer is willing to pay for that house has increased to one of the largest margins that we've seen in a long time, which is roughly about 9%. That's big. So a lot of sellers are still in that mentality that, hey, I've got, my neighbor 2 years ago got $500,000 for their house. It's 2 years down the road, so now I should get $525,000. Not how it works. It is not how it works. You may be equal to what they got 2 years ago right now. You may actually be less than what they got 2 years ago. And you may have that one neighbor who is in a situation where they've had to sell their house. And now you've just had your values reduced, because when an appraiser appraises a house, he always uses the most recent comps. So he's going to start from within the subdivision generally. If you're in a subdivision, you can start within a subdivision. They always try to make the houses apples to apples. 3 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, 2 baths. We may have 1,500 square feet here. We may be 1,550 square feet here. They always are trying to match them up, and they're always going to go off the most recent sales first. If your agent's telling them it's square footage, wrong. It is not off square footage. It is off of apples to apples comparisons. Generally, they're going to have 3 to 4 comparable sales, and they're always going to put the weight on the one. They generally, let me put that way, will always put the weight on the one that's closest matching to yours with the closest sale date. So you can actually go on, look through Zillow, look through homes.com, look through realtor.com, look on my webpage, homesorlando.for-sale, and you can see the most recent sales. Go through, look at the pictures, do a comparison mentally. Hey, they got this for this house, they got this for that house, and try and, and you can start to figure out what your house is really worth. Plus, there's a lot of programs out there that will give you a monthly update on what your home is worth, which is a great starting point. It's a starting point. You always want to have a full analysis done on your house. So that's where the market is overall right now. Some of the other interesting things that we had, and Mr. Pulte has really come out swinging since he has jumped into the housing department with Freddie and Fannie. And this week he directed the Federal Housing Financing Agency to start looking at using crypto as an asset for reserves, which that kind of makes sense. I can understand that, because it's an asset. It's no different than a savings account, a treasury bond, a IRA, a 401k. So it makes sense that, okay, if someone's holding, $100,000 worth of Bitcoin, why can't they use that for their reserve requirements when they're purchasing a home? Because a lot of times, a lot of these guidelines require, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months worth of reserves, depending on the program that you're using, depending on your credit score, how much reserves that you need to have. Well, if you happen to be a person who holds a lot of assets in crypto, but not a lot of cash, that right now it can hurt you, because we're not allowed to use the crypto as an asset. This will allow them now to take your crypto, say it's Bitcoin, allow you to use that as an asset when you're purchasing a home. which I thought that was fine, and I can understand that completely. No different than if you gave them a portfolio of your stocks. Same thing. Makes a lot of sense overall. So looking at all that, how is our market here in Orlando? Well, it's just kind of sitting as stagnant as it has really for the past 6 to 8 months. Not a lot is changing. We had 416 homes sales last week. There's only one more than the prior week. Our inventory of single family homes continues to grow. We're up to nearly 90. We're up to very close to 9,500 homes for sale in the market, which that's an extremely large number. Our condo market is still in the same situation it has been, and I believe will continue to be. I think the condo market for the next 2 to 3 years it's just going to be very slow overall. The inventory decreased by 8, so maybe we've peaked on the number of units that we're seeing for sale, but overall it's extremely stagnant. And here we see overall our months of inventory for Orlando is sitting at 5.2. Again, it's a buyer's market. Um, the buyers right now, I know I'm working with a number of my listings, and the buyers are being very demanding. Some of the things they're asking for is kind of funny, but got to get the sale, got to get it through. We actually had to take a picture of changing out the air filter for one of the buyers. It's what he wanted. Okay, we did it. It was they quote put it on the addendum, so we provided exactly what they asked for. Sometimes you got to do the crazy things. And then I had another one where we had to fix a little something in an electrical panel, nothing major, and I forgot to send a picture of the panel with the cover on it, and had to go back and take a picture with the cover on it. So, I mean, these are the things that the buyers are asking for now. And when your house has been sitting for 90 to 100 days, possibly even more, and you want to get this transaction completed, sometimes you got to do those things. It's what the market is demanding right now. And then we see here on the higher end homes, the 500,000 over a million, we're sitting at over 6 months worth of inventory. And then here, the number I point out every single week, original list to sales price, we're sitting at 93.4%. Not quite as bad as what Redfin says the spread is at 9%, but we're pretty darn close. And then here, if you look at over a million, you're seeing a 10% discount off the original list price, which I find interesting because there's been a couple articles out in the Orlando Business Journal over the past maybe month about how the luxury market is incredible. Like, really? You might want to tell that to some of those sellers who've had to discount their homes, $100,000, $200,000 in order to get the home sold. I don't think they feel that it's actually kind of booming. Then graphically, here you go. Here's our sales. I mean, that's about as consistent as you can possibly get overall. And we look at our inventory for single family homes, and that slow and steady climb. We're up over 28% since January of this year. That's a lot of extra homes. And we're going into what I call vacation season. Generally, you see the volume of showings, volume of searches start to fall right around July 4th. A lot of people are going to be taking off time, starting to do the family vacations. So July, I think we're going to see the numbers dip down a little bit. Hopefully not too much, but I think we're going to see those numbers start to dip down a little bit as far as the number of sales that are going to be coming through in July. Then we get into our condo market. Here you go, months of inventory, nearly 9.5 months of inventory for Orlando. That's a lot of inventory. 4,600 units right now on the market in the Orlando area. And you see their original list, the sales price is sitting around 92.6%. And our average days on market, 83. So as a seller, you've got to go in, you've got to know this. You're going to want to look within your own subdivision where the condo is located and really get a feel for how many days on market within your subdivision. Because remember, this is an average of all of them. It's not within your subdivision. Some condo communities may have a little bit higher demand and they may be sitting at 45 days. And then you go through and you look at how many price decreases these people have to go through in order to get this thing sold. You may see that because maybe you're in a little bit older condo community, maybe it's 120 days on average. So mentally, you've got to prepare yourself that, hey, it may not be a quick sale. Or if I do want it to be a quick sale, I may have to be willing to give up something, possibly sales price in order to get this unit sold. So that's where our numbers are for this week in Orlando. Thank you again. And if you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, please, like always, like, subscribe, and join us every week for the Orlando Real Estate Buzz. I'm Brendan Rendo with the Homes in Orlando team. Take care.